So tonight we are going to be talking about the future of digital transformation, which is part of the summer discussion program brought to you by Binary District and the Strelka Institute. You can visit www.binarydistrict.com to sign up for the rest of the program, which includes free of charge open lectures with speakers from all over the world, discussions and talks on digital society. Binary District is a collaborative tech community based in Amsterdam. They conduct seminars, workshops, and conferences on new technologies in such acclaimed tech hubs as Amsterdam, Berlin, and London. They bring together forward-thinking names in tech to create a collaborative, mutually beneficial platform for the exchange of knowledge and technological advancement. We are being hosted here today by the Strelka Institute, which, as I'm sure you know, is an NGO, architecture school, trendy bar and nightclub, has great views of the cathedral. They do educational programs aimed at young people with backgrounds in architecture, design, social sciences. They are reshaping cities all across Russia. They've reshaped Moscow. And every summer here in the courtyard, they bring people from all walks of life all around the world to give lectures, conferences, and film screenings. And lastly, the partner of this Digital Society Discussion Forum, hosted by Binary District, is Vostok, a tech project which aims to form digital infrastructure for certifying, registering, and tracking data in enterprise and public administration. So I will just introduce our speakers briefly. So firstly, to my left, we have Charles Adler. He's one of the co-founders of Kickstarter, former head of design. Then to his left, we have Rafael Abramyan, who's an executive director at Rambler, which is part of the broader Strelka Mammoet family. And then on the far left, we have George Held, who is vice president of digital business at VimpelCom, which you all know very well as Beeline. So what we are talking about here is the future of digital transformation, how this is all affecting business and society. I work for the Financial Times. You know, we in the newspaper industry, we are perhaps one of the businesses that is the most affected by the advance of the internet. 20 years ago, you know, we and most other media didn't even really have websites. A lot of places thought that this was just a fad that was going to pass. No one was really going to want to watch a screen all day, you know, for 12 hours. Now, lots of newspapers don't even publish newspapers anymore, and we're worried that companies that didn't even exist 20 years ago, like Facebook, are going to take away all of our business. So Charles, I'd like to start with you. So you at Kickstarter, you have obviously seen many startups come and go over the time, and just in the time that Kickstarter has evolved, the market for how people try to raise money for them seems to have changed quite drastically. But something that I find quite a lot of the time is maybe people are just trying to reinvent the wheel, which means trying to come up with new ways to do things that already exist. One of my favorite little genres of fun on the internet is when people invent pointless startups for things that already exist. So one of my favorites is Airbnb. They announced that they were going to launch a fully curated, digitally run boutique renting experience. And you think, congratulations, guys, you've invented the hotel. Or there have been several startups in Silicon Valley where they said, what if there was, not a bus, but not a car, something in between, some sort of boutique transportation system that would be run privately and would make stops at various points, allowing predetermined routes to get people to their jobs. And I think, congratulations, guys, you've invented the Marshrutka. Recently, there's been, I'm sure you've all been, many of you might even be participating in them yourselves, ICOs, initial coin offerings, which to the cynic, you might say this is just a fancy way of using blockchain to do Kickstarter. So my question is, how much of what is being changed in business? How much of this is just about coming up with a new way to package and market what are really very old things, or are we really encountering new paradigms every few years?
So is this on? Can you guys hear me? Yes? Cool. I think there's something very innate in human nature about I, Charles, can do something better than you, even though you've done it before, right? That's opinion, perspective, and so forth. There's PayPal, and then there's Stripe, right? And given they're extremely different companies, but you know, I'll give another little example. This is a little bit of a meme on Kickstarter. So this is my wallet, right? And it's a physical wallet. We still do these things. And yet, like, there's a ton of little micro wallets that are created on or funded on Kickstarter. I happen to just back another one because this thing's falling apart and I need another one, right? And so just think about that for one. Think about one of the things that we like to reflect on with regard to Kickstarter is how we've been doing this before, right? Now maybe at some level, like it is, you know, sort of a very new paradigm in some way, but really it's perhaps a codification of a behavior or a paradigm that was already existing in the world. So what I mean by that is, I'll tell two stories. One was there's an artist and a journalist, so the journalist, I'll tell that story. That's maybe a little bit more contextually fun. The journalist wanted to cover Barack Obama's, one of his speeches somewhere, and she had just been fired from the institution that was employing her as a journalist, but she still wanted to do it anyway. So what did she do? This is pre-Kickstarter. She, like about a year and a half before Kickstarter, she put a PayPal button on her website, right? And effectively crowdfunded her way to pay to get into the room and cover that event. Go back further back in time, and this is something that Perry, my co-founder, so there's three of us who started the company, Perry being the sort of cornerstone, the three of us are in love with history. We're always seeking patterns out in history that can equate to what we're doing now, right? And I think that's a little bit of what you're describing. And so the one thing that Perry had discovered, which was fascinating to me, is anybody familiar with the Statue of Liberty in New York? Raise your hand. Yeah, it's cool. A couple people. Sweet. Okay, so the Statue of Liberty, gift from France, super sweet. Guess what? It comes into the Bay of New York or Hudson Bay, and we can't afford to put it up. Well, apparently the story goes that the city of New York, like the people of the city of New York, not the government, were starting to chip in money because they were so excited about this object coming in from France that they wanted to erect it. And so that, you could argue, that was a form of peer-to-peer funding or crowdfunding. And so there are these patterns, and I think that's one way to look at the world. I can't comment on the critique of Airbnb becoming a hotel, but I do actually talk about, if you will, like the origin of Airbnb. Is it a hotel, right? And it is technically not a hotel, but has a similar experience to a hotel. They've sort of digitized, if you will.
Is Uber a taxi?
Right, and I think if the definition of taxi is I'm paying someone to get from A to B, then yes. But if the definition is that I'm paying and this debate can go on for an hour actually, or a couple of days, but you know, is it in the same frame as a traditional, say, taxi company? And I would say no. And I think there's a great benefit to that, which is being able to think about the world enabled by technology to service people in a better way, right? And so the real thing with Uber is, dude, I can just sit here, like while we're sitting, and maybe I'll do this, like while we're sitting here doing this interview, I can call a car and actually not have to call it, just like hit a few buttons and no one will ever know, and then walk off the stage and get in a car, right? And you couldn't do that before, right? And so it takes something like an Uber or a Lyft to kind of push those boundaries.
Okay, so moving on to Rafael. So you in Rambler, you work in the media business. You are in many ways at the forefront of some of the fastest changes that are happening. And one thing that I find as I get older, I'm 30 years old, is that I will look at sites, even including those owned by Rambler, that I used to be very familiar with 10 or even 5 or 3 years ago, and because of how quickly things are changing online and how differently people of different generations use the internet, I often find I look at a ficha and it's barely recognizable from what it was, say 10 years ago. So what is your secret? How do you manage to stay ahead of the time so that the kids keep coming to you and you don't find that you're a dinosaur and someone new has come along and taken away your audience and your business?
Yeah. Hi. Is it working for me? Oh, perfect. Hi, yeah, we're at Rambler. We know what time is because we've been around for 20 years, and that's a lot for an internet company. I think it's even more than Kickstarter, right? Oh, so yeah, 21 years Rambler has been around, and I think all of you sitting in the audience know what Rambler is. You also know what Afisha is, and Lenta, and Gazette, and all of the brands that we own. And here we're in the media and entertainment sector, which is, I would say, most severely damaged by all the disruption that is going on. Obviously, because in terms of the user, we're a B2C company. We're not an oil company. We're not a refinery company, a steel manufacturing company. Our user, our end user, is yourselves, right? Is us, is everyone else, and the user is changing very fast. So I would say that the key element of disruption for the business is how quickly the user of the business, the end game, basically the one who is actually using your product, changes. And the guys who uses our products, basically, as Max himself and anyone else here in this change, you've changed dramatically over the last 10 years, right? So basically, you're now used to completely different types of and patterns of usage. You're now used to completely different types of spending your time and basically thinking about your time in the first place. So you're used to being connected everywhere, and I think we'll hear about this from our telecom guys very soon. So basically, you're used to having everything on your mobile. You don't need anything else. Basically, we know a lot of people right now who don't even own anything like a laptop or a desktop or anything else. So everything you need is in your mobile. So basically, you always need to think mobile first. And then the third, basically, factor of this is that you're used to having everything in ecosystem of your own. So basically, you're used to having one and the same apps for, if you hail a taxi, you use basically an app that you're used to. If you want to read the news, you use the app or basically a browser and you go to the website that you're used to. So you're basically surrounding yourself with a kind of an ecosystem that you're comfortable with because you have so many services, you have so many media products, you have so many clutter of news that you need to, at some point, you just need to choose. You just need to ordinate your life by saying, okay, I don't read this, I only read these brands, I only use these kind of services because otherwise you'll be just overwhelmed by all of the flow of new apps and all of the flow of new services that is coming in, and you would have to just explode or not be able to use everything. So basically, those three factors. First, you're changing very fast. You really need to have everything up to the point. You need everything to be connected all the time that you're around. You need everything to be on the mobile, and you need everything to be in the ecosystem that you built for your own. This is basically the system where we operate as a media and entertainment company. And to operate it better, basically being a media company, we started to converge ourselves. So we see that basically in the media and in almost any business, basically, the boundaries are getting erased. There are no more boundaries, and in the media and entertainment sector, those boundaries are long gone. So basically, you want to consume content, you want to read in offline, in online, and you want to have it on one and the same platform. You want to be built on one and the same address. You want to be built through one and the same card that you once put in your mobile. So to do all of this possible for the user, we basically also started to create an ecosystem of our own, the same as our competitors like Yandex and Mail. Everyone is creating their own ecosystem. And basically, besides from building your own ecosystem, which probably is the first advice to answer your question, Max, what to do in the situation when the user is getting more and more advanced, the user is getting more and more sophisticated, and they want more every time. So basically, they want faster, easier, more user-oriented user experience better. So we need to first build an ecosystem. Second, we need to always come up with the new products, and we need to always innovate, but innovate very cautiously. So we need to come up with MVPs. We need to start and build slow and see how this goes with the user. If the user reacts and responds positively, then we need to grow further and we need to build up on this product. And the third basically factor of being successful in the new, I would say, paradigm of completely disrupted economy is being mobile first. So basically, anything you saw on the screen before we started, probably everyone saw Afisha. Basically, Afisha is completely mobile. So all of the products that Afisha does, they're mobile first, desktop and laptop second. Because we understand that our users, Afisha users, who are actually young and older individuals with great taste, with urge to have everything which is new, branded, which is quality and interesting. So those users, they're just not with desktop anymore. They don't use laptops, they don't use desktops for their entertainment. They still use it for work sometimes, but for their entertainment, for their daily needs, for their communication and even commuting in the city, they only use mobile. So be mobile first, be iterative in terms of how you develop your products, and try to build an ecosystem of your own where you try to engage the customer. So I would say this is it.
Okay, now moving on to George, who works for Beeline, which powers many of our mobile phones here in Russia, including mine right here. We have a Beeline contract at work. So my question for you is, you obviously had a very solid business model before everyone started spending all their time on their mobiles. But something as a journalist that I see quite a lot is that a lot of companies will make a big show of trying to use things like blockchain, AI, big data, even if it's not necessarily that core to their business model. So my question for you is, how important is disruption and new technology to the ways that you make money, and is it even necessarily that desirable that you change the way that you make money?
Fantastic, thanks a lot for this. Actually, for telco company, this is absolutely different game because people's behavior changed a lot in the last, let's say, 5 years. I'm sure you all remember that previously you used to make phone calls like this. Yeah? Obviously, using telephone like this nowadays. Yeah? But it actually changes everything, and the way even telco operators are starting to play. And this is specifically important for Russia purely because of the size of the country. Don't forget that every time you make a phone call, we need to make sure this entire infrastructure, 7,000 kilometers, works. Yeah? So when you call in from Moscow to Vladivostok, the phone call actually needs to happen there. And if you're looking at the normal internet world, it's on the best efforts. Yeah? The Uber gonna come to you on the best efforts, not in the telco world. When you want to make phone call, it needs to happen. When you want to access internet, it needs to access. And from this perspective, all these tens of thousands employees who are actually building these networks and maintaining, we have all this responsibility for them and for those millions of customers. So again, if you're looking at those innovation startups, which is a great thing, and the 4 guys in a garage and they're building something and it's fantastic. Usually it's used by them and a couple of other of their friends. When you're doing it in the telco world, you have responsibility for all of your customers, you have responsibility for all of your employees, so you cannot really play with this. And again, with Russia, 11 time zones, 7,000 kilometers brings absolutely different level of complexity. For example, personally, before working here in Russia, I used to work in Dubai. Nice place, very nicely. If you have a problem with the base station, you get on the car or you put it in the metro, and your engineer goes there, and in 20 minutes, he is on the farthest part of Dubai, yeah, or of UAE. I'm flying to Novosibirsk tomorrow, and from Novosibirsk, it's another 8 hours to Vladivostok. So it's not even in the middle of Siberia yet. So absolutely different scope, absolutely different level of complexity. When we're doing television, we broadcast on 9 time zones. So you broadcast United States, with all due respect, it's only 3. So level of complexity is enormous. And at the same time, we have to be up to time, up to speed, because we all speak 4G, we all expect people to do 5G tomorrow, all those innovative services, and we have to bring this. So it is key important thing for us, but innovation is done at the core of the telco. We're not playing on the side. We're not playing on something nice, blockchainish, which you can play together today, tomorrow you can throw it away. What you're doing in a telco, you change the processes in organization, you change the business proposition, you change the culture of organization. So when today you're doing this, and this is probably the most fabulous and probably the most exciting proposition is on the market, gigabytes for steps. More steps you make per day, more megabytes of data we give into you. This is the first time in the world where telco is doing this. And this is a good example of digital innovation in the reality at the core. So when you promote healthy lifestyle and for every 10,000 step person is making, we are actually rewarding him. And this is for us the only important part of innovation. We strategically made a decision. We're not going to do PR stuff. We're not going to do exciting, cool things just because two guys in the garage are going to love it. But we have responsibility for our customers. We have responsibility to our employees. And that's why we're doing innovation at core.
Okay, thank you very much for that. So now I'm going to move on a little in the discussion, and next question is for Charles. So something that is happening a lot in Russia at the moment, there is as I'm sure many of you know, there is a very big push coming in from the Russian government and from President Putin to bring in something that's called the digital economy. It's this very powerful government program that is aimed to stop Russia from lagging behind all of its competitors in the world in a very fast changing area. And the very big push is coming, as it often does in Russia, specifically from the government. And if it's not coming from the government, often it's coming from a rich guy who wants to help out, just much like Strelka, which is owned by Mr. Mamut. So my question for you is, how important do you think it is for the government and rich people to be involved in pushing change from the top up, as opposed to your four guys in the garage making something that they market on Kickstarter where they're going from the ground up?
Cool. So, I think if I can take us back a bit to at least my introduction to the internet, which was before the web. So I'm talking about the early 90s and then the moment that the web kind of popped up. And I think it's important to recognize that the internet wouldn't happen without government support. So at least in the US, the story of the internet comes from ARPANET, right? It was called ARPANET before it was called the internet, or before it was the public internet. And that was funded in part by the Department of Defense in the United States. And I was fortunate enough in the early 90s to go to a university that was also heavily funded by said Department of Defense. And so I had, by virtue of that, early access to the internet. And so that maybe the way that I would sort of reposition that question as an answer is, I think we need some government influence, but if government thinks about who they're empowering as the four people, let's not say guys, but the four people in a garage, to then invent the things on top of the thing that they're providing, that's pretty astounding. And if you go back, there's some really amazing documentaries around the origins of the internet and the pioneers that made that possible. You hear a lot of these stories, right? Sort of this public-private partnership. And so I think that is one level of requirement, which would be more about empowering than restricting, right? Restriction can always come later. Unfortunately, it does sometimes. The other piece that I would say is maybe going into the rich people story. One of you guys, you had mentioned, Rafael, the term ecosystem earlier. And I think part of another way to sort of apply ecosystem is I think about this as an entrepreneur who's been through a lot to get Kickstarter up and running, and my new project, going through a lot to get a new project up and running. It's very difficult. And the ecosystem that's necessary for any entrepreneur to bring a new idea into market is you need people, an ecosystem of folks to also support you. It's called angel investors, or maybe VCs that have been operators and founders before who are investing in the next generation. It's kind of paying it forward, almost philanthropic, but not entirely. And so I think both of those things that you're asking about are necessary in a unique way.
Rafael, I just like to build on that. So in the media industry, one thing that's happened a lot in recent years is digital disruption is really hitting our bottom line, because it used to be, back before there were websites like Craigslist or Avitoy in Russia, all the classified advertising, and most of the rest of the advertising was in a newspaper, because that was just a place where you would naturally go. Now it's all online, because that's where everybody is. And most of that revenue is going to a few big companies in Silicon Valley, like Facebook and Google. And initially in the media industry, there was this idea that we had to embrace this. So I will tell you a story. I used to work, before I was at the FT, at BuzzFeed, which very much tries to stay at the forefront of everything digital, everything cutting edge in the world of news. And just 3 years ago, when I worked there, they would tell us things like, in the future, we don't even really need to have a platform or have a website. It's all going to be on social media. You could write an article and you could just post it direct to Instagram. And fast forward to now, and Jonah Peretti, the founder of BuzzFeed, he says the same thing that Rupert Murdoch from News Corporation says about Facebook and Google, which is they should be regulated. They have a monopoly, and they need to be sharing this revenue that they are unfairly taking away as advertisers from the news media. So how much, building on what Charles said about, you need involvement from the government in creating the right environment. How much do you think that is necessary, especially when some of your biggest competitors in Russia, in the media, they are in fact owned by the government?
Yeah, thanks. So yeah, in one way you're right. So basically, Facebook is taking some part of the media to himself by basically imploding that you as a user, you must read all of the news from your Facebook page, from your news feed. But to be honest, we don't see that at much of a trend. So it's actually going down from the way it used to be 3 years ago when you were still with BuzzFeed. So I'm more or less with your employer on that thing, because 3 years ago, I think before the clutter became extremely annoying. So before whatever you had on Facebook was too much. You were actually enjoying having your news feed. You were enjoying having news coming from the likes of your friend, news coming from what have been suggested to you, and you saw it as an advantage. You saw it's somebody who is personalizing things for you, and you get it in your own way, and you see everything which is interesting for you. Right now, since first of all, there's been a lot of malpractice with Facebook showing you the ads that you want to see, with all this, Russia meddling into the U.S. elections and all the stuff that we're not going to discuss on this stage, obviously. But still, it was right. So there was a fact that Facebook was using a lot of the data that it has to serve you the ads and serve you the news that you wanted to see. So they can do this, and people start to be aware of it. People start not be willing to have all this personalization being. They don't want to be treated as as a user. They want to be treated as individuals who have their tastes, who have their views on things, and that's why in terms of media, they're still basically getting closer to the brands. So they know the brands they love. They know the editorial people they love. They know basically the editors, the journalists like yourself, who they trust, and they want to read something from them. They don't want to read anything that pops up in their newsfeed, anything that has been liked by their friends. So I wouldn't say that we're in as much of a trouble in terms of Facebook taking our audience and giving nothing to us. But obviously to somehow defend ourselves from the situation that is still a threat, we're using the same strategy that your employer, BuzzFeed, used. We're getting more and more native advertising. We're getting more and more branded content, so that we're not as much dependent on the user coming directly on our website. So we just need the users who are ready to look for our content, who want our content, who are loyal to what we do, loyal to our editors, and they can consume it anywhere. They will still be served the advertising that we're selling to them. And in this way, we're trying to save our bottom line, as you said, right? We're trying to stay EBITDA positive, even in the fact when people do not come directly to our websites to see the news that we're publishing. But they still are loyal to the brand. So I would say one of the conclusions of this is always think about your brand, always think about what you write, and always think about how important and how quality your information comes to the user. But don't think about them coming to your website. Don't think in these terms. Websites are gone, so it's nothing. You need the brand, and you need the ability to reach your brand, to interact with your brand anywhere where it's possible. On the social pages, on I would say on iPad, on RSS, on anywhere that people are used to spending their time and people are used to getting their information from. And coming back to the question about the competition and what we need from the government, I would say that actually a lot of things are being done for empowering the ecosystem, the infrastructure that we live in, and things that have been done in the US some time ago, and we're just in some ways replicating, in some ways trying to find something new, but adapt it to the way that is better done in Russia. And I only see positive signs in it, so I don't see it as being too aggressive or too coming from the top. It's more of kind of empowering so that it actually starts to come from the bottom. To have it start from the bottom, you need to show people that there are rules, that there are things that can be done, that basically if you want to create something, you can after that protect your IP, you can protect your creation and operate in an understandable market. That's something that has not been done 10 years ago. It's being done now. So basically we're pushing this thing forward. For us as a company, as a corporation that is basically operating on this market, it's a kind of a threat because obviously more and more startups are coming in. But I think we're lucky to have this kind of competition coming up. And at some point we use M&A, we use basically acquisitions to buy some of the startups that are popping out because they're doing something really cool. In some of the other ways, we just look how things perform and try to replicate stuff. If we see great ideas, we try to replicate them or buy them, or basically understand that okay, this is not our market. We're not going to go there. So I would say it's only getting better and better. And the fact that some of the media are owned by the government is not something that's making them lag behind, but in the other way around, sometimes it gives them more financing that helps them, also boost their startup initiatives, also boost their technology initiatives. So it's only getting better and better for the market, I would say.
Okay, so moving on to George. So in the telecoms industry in Russia, you obviously are regulated quite a lot by the government, which is expecting quite a lot of all the telecom companies financially. But generally, if you look at your industry, this is not one where you generally see a lot of plucky young guys who just started their own telecoms company in their garage coming in and eating into the big three mobile operators. Instead, what you do see more and more in Russia in recent years is companies that work in other industries completely. They've decided that that they're going to move into the mobile industry. Companies like Tinkoff Bank, they recently launched their own mobile operator, and then at the same time, some other telecom companies in many countries they will say we're not really a telecoms company anymore. What we're about is we are about digital communication, and that could mean so much more than just having a telecoms network. So how important is it to you where the threats to your industry from people trying to get into your market share are coming from, and how do you have to adapt to meet those challenges?
So again, to your question on digital, and if digital is the guys who are wearing short pants and have lots of tattoos, so we have plenty of this stuff, yeah? And we actually have the entire floor in organization who is actually all the proper hipsters from the university like this one, who are writing the code and who sits on the bean bags and have really colorful environments, and all this stuff is great. And we definitely don't perceive ourselves as only a communication company. I know it's going to sound a little bit as a cliche, but there are lots of things which we're doing right now, and very substantial portion of the revenue is actually done through what we call digital services, and there are a number of verticals. And I'm going to spend maybe 2 minutes specifically on one which I believe is very sexy and very interesting. I'm going to talk about big data. Big data, though it's very provocative, but being a telco operator, we're doing a lot with this stuff. And just give you an example, my big data guys are jokingly saying that they can predict when the girl gonna dump the boyfriend 3 days before she actually gonna dump him.
So you are reading the messages.
So, and there are a number of reasons. It's not about reading the messages because people's behavior actually changes, yeah? So she spends more time in the different places. She goes less to the restaurants. She consumes less stuff on Affiche, goes to the different movies. So all of this is just a behavioral things. But
there were stories about how, Facebook and native advertising might know that you're pregnant before you do.
Okay, so, but to be absolutely...
That's a true story.
That's truth.
But to be absolutely correct, my beginning was we're jokingly saying that we can do this because it's a big question about ethics. And I'm not even talking about regulatory because regulatory is very clear. In Russia, they have a couple of very strong laws in terms of what we can do, what we cannot do. The bigger complexity is about ethics around this, who we are, actually to tell to this girl that she's going to dump the boyfriend, yeah? And this is a separate question we're not going to talk, but also when we're talking about big data, it's actually used a lot in the core business. Right now, we are building 10 new stores per day. Look, this is a phenomenal number. Beeline opens 10 stores per day. And to find the location where those stores needs to be placed, nowadays only possible with big data because we see movement of people. We know where people go from one place to another, where they sleep, where they work, and we are putting the stores in the location where they need it. And this is a proper big data analytics, not done for the purpose of impressing people or giving advice to the girl about dumping the boyfriend, but applying to the core element of the business. And with this big data, we're not only finding the place where the store needs to be, we're telling what time the store needs to be open, how many people needs to be on the shift, and all of this is designed to make kind of people experience more relevant, more user, more friendly. Similar with the base station, we put in base stations where they need to be, and we constantly move in them, the same as the store. So lots of innovation, very important. We have big pool of people, of those hipster guys who are coding day and night, and they're creating super algorithms, and in Russia we are so proud of, because probably the best big data scientists are actually here, and that's not here in Moscow, but Yekaterinburg, Novosibirsk, those are the places where there's St. Petersburg, obviously. But they actually changed the life, changing the business, make it more digital, make it more interesting, and make it more exciting. And this is where we believe digital evolution actually changes the business for good.
Can I jump on that for a quick second? One of the things I think is actually really interesting about what you're describing is when thinking about a retail store and like where to place it, but it's coming from the data team, which is probably part of the technology team or some association, is I think there's an important but missed part in here, which is the communication across teams, which historically in most corporations is incredibly, if I can use some props, siloed. And the water here should never come into the water because you're going to contaminate me, should never come in here. But now actually what you're talking about is a big pool of water that is constantly needing to talk to be able to come up with a solution like what you described. I think that's really fascinating.
And like in the corporate world, and this is actually the biggest effort which we're putting, is not about finding the data scientist or communicating, but building the culture within the organization. And to bring this agile, Scrum, design thinking, all of those kind of innovative things, and bring it into the corporate organization, extremely complex. Yeah. It took us a number of years. And I'll give you a couple of examples. We actually even produce a locally developed soap opera in Beeline. It's an 8-series soap opera designed, made by our own employees. It's produced for mobile phones, and the soap opera is about agile. And obviously the story is about the guy from digital who falls in love with the girl from marketing, and she happens to be a Scrum Master. And this is the full life story around it, but in the part of this life story, we're actually explaining the principles of Agile, principles of Scrum, and how it all works together. Yeah. And this was the biggest challenge, and still is the biggest challenge in organization, to actually bring everybody into new thinking paradigm.
Yeah, that's actually a very big point. Exactly. So Beeline is Vion is actually a good example of trying to merge all of those corporations, because in a corporation like Vion, the main business, the core business, is still a telecom, right? It's still somehow technological business. It's a business that involves a lot of technicians and a lot of digital thinking. But with industries like oil refineries and industries like manufacturing, it's much harder to do. We know a lot of guys from those industries that are starting their own, something ventures. So basically, there's a big, I would not call names obviously, but so basically it's a big manufacturing company with billions of dollars in valuation and revenues, and they start something ventures. And obviously, the big corporation, the core itself, and the venture department, they don't work together. So it's a completely different thing. They just give, I don't know, $100 million away for this. They even call it charity. So it's like, okay, do something silly, interesting, with all those people in the garages and with T-shirts and hipster looks, and never come close to our core business, because otherwise you're going to contaminate it, as you said. So basically, you will spoil our core business. Just let it flow and go with the flow, and just do whatever you want, so that it's PR. So one thing that all of the corporations need to understand, that it's not about PR anymore. It's about actually survival. It's about being able to survive the next decade without the effect on your bottom line. Because Internet of Things is I think the first and the most prominent usage of Internet of Things is actually in the oil industry, because they need all those drones and they need all those nanorobots to find a place to actually drill. So and to understand this, to embrace this, they need to be open for this innovation, and they need to actually reshape all of the management structure, with people on top being not able to understand how things perform digitally. And it's a big question for everyone.
I'd say that the oil business should be more concerned about energy and where they get energy than oil, because that's exactly a depleting service, right? I think this kind of gets into your commentary about journalism as well, which is like really thinking about if the folks in the oil industry can abstract out what are we actually in the business of. It used to be about plunging the earth to get oil to fuel cars and whatever else it is, but there's other forms of energy, right? Call it the sun and whatnot, right? How does solar or wind come into it, and how can we transform, which I recognize is super hard. But I think where most companies, like this sort of established companies, suffer is from established thinking. We keep thinking that the thing that we're doing is oil, or building infrastructure for telecommunications in a way that has been done before, or it's about selling newspapers. But really, it's about providing truth, right? And providing content which is the vehicle to that truth. And unfortunately, that's where Facebook or Twitter kind of ends up eating up the old business model. Right?
How do you, it's been nearly 10 years since Kickstarter was founded. How do you think that your mission has changed in those 10 years?
I mean, one thing to point out is, and I think you guys mentioned this earlier, is Kickstarter's going to turn 10 next year, so we're 9 years old, and that's like a really small period of time. And I say that in that, like, the mission hasn't actually, we haven't had to go through that level of abstraction yet. I suspect, give it another 10 years, or give it, and maybe another 20 years, and there will be a point of abstraction in terms of, well, what are we really in the business of doing? I will say that we had, and this is sort of funny, the moment. So has anybody in the audience launched a Kickstarter campaign? A couple people? No? Backed? Okay, a couple people have backed.
About 10, yeah.
So I can speak intimately from, so I've run 2 Kickstarter campaigns. I've eaten my own dog food. It's brutal psychologically. The moment that you push the button to launch the campaign, very stressful. It's kind of like when we launched Kickstarter, which is, oh my God, are we really going live, right? And so there was a point right before we went live where the 3 of us had a call. Amy, we're all in different cities. Had a call to, okay guys, we're about to launch. The world's about to change for us, right? Which is to say, it could go down or it could go up, right? And if it goes up, or if it's going down, that might mean we need to change some of the things that we feel are very true to what we're doing. Now, we never had to make that decision because it just went up, but that's kind of a similar, I think, like a similar moment of abstraction that is necessary for, and I think one of you guys had mentioned the word earlier, survival, right? And I think that's a very key pressure, whether you're an established company or a baby startup that is just fighting for attention, right?
So I'd just like to follow up on that by going back to what George said. So you obviously have vast amounts of data that you're able to do amazing things with. But as you said, you have these ethical issues that come up with the responsibility that comes with that. And at the same time, you're working in an industry where it might not have happened to anyone in Russia yet, but it is very, very easy. Just like that, you could be BlackBerry, you could be Nokia. All of a sudden, you could lose sight of what the trends are in your industry, and your bottom line could go to zero. So how do you manage to have those very important, kind of abstract discussions about what are we doing and why are we doing it, while making sure that you're still ahead of your competition in terms of making money?
Yes, so again, on the core business, we continue pushing like a rollout of the network, rollout of the stores, rollout of all this core infrastructure. But what we're doing, very important, we're adding the layer on the top of it. And the layer is designed to work in such a way that make user experience more interesting, more engaging, but at the same time not to fully disrupt what you're doing as a core. So, for example, our call centers, we have a very extensive portfolio of chatbots. So right now, when you communicate to Beeline's call center, 60% of text inquiries are actually handled by chatbot. And this is very interesting. So it's all designed to make experience more engaging, but at the same time, chatbots in Russia are much more sophisticated than what you have, for example, in the United States, because of language nuances and people have a different language, even in St. Petersburg versus Moscow. Yeah? So bot needs to understand this and understand those flavors. And similarly, you need to start putting layers on the core network, like what we're starting to do on the television proposition. So we're running our own multimedia business by complying what we have around big data to bring more targeting, more recommendation engines on the layers of media. Because as you know, if you consume YouTube, 80% of your time in the consumption is actually looking for content, not actually watching the movie. And this is the paradox, yeah? And being a telco operator, you can actually understand what people are actually searching for and make a recommendation. So by using your core assets, building very elegant layers on those core assets, you build this, we call it wedding cake. Yeah? So more layers you have on this wedding cake, the better the cake is. And this is exactly how we are transforming business to become more sustainable, more exciting, and remove all this noise which people are constantly getting from the internet with all this communication which is not relevant to them.
So we started a little late. So I just want to make sure. Do we still have some time before we move over to the questions? Or okay, 5 minutes. Okay, so I will move on to Rafael. You were talking earlier about how people what they really care about is the brands that they're giving. Everyone has on your phone. You have on your screen. You have the little boxes with all the apps in them. You can sort them out. But one thing that we're seeing with that is something that we see with a lot of industries generally is that there is consolidation. If you look at China, where they've gone further than everyone else, they have WeChat, which is basically everything you could possibly want inside one app. You can text people. You can pay your bills online. You can order a taxi. The government can read all of it in China. And when you like in your business, you are providing a lot of different things that are aimed at different audiences. The people who are the core audience of Afisha is not the same people who are still using LiveJournal. So how are you monitoring the way that your audience changes to make sure that you are still providing everything to the people that you want to reach?
Yes, I'll start with saying that basically Tencent and WeChat for me is still a phenomena. I think and globally, so nowhere else apart from China, people actually use one app to do almost everything they're doing in their mobile. So I would say both in the US, in all of the Western world and in Russia, people use a lot of apps to do a lot of things. And then mainly it's one app for one function. They don't like to have different apps for one function. That is concerning on apps. So people are starting to change this behavior with going more and more to the ecosystems that I referred to before, but still it's one app, one function, and we're not in the same shoes as the Chinese. And we can, if we go further about this, basically we understand that WeChat gained a lot of its presence and a lot of its basically functions by doing some crazy marketing campaigns, like getting your tickets for $1 when they actually cost $10, which is basically government-funded reduction, and a lot of things like that. So basically, this is how WeChat became a complete giant and basically consumed all of the media space for people in China. So we don't see this happening in Russia, and I think in Russia people actually love to have the variety of content, and that's why we as Rambler&Co being not a single basically brand. We have different brands for different types of audience, as you mentioned. So we have Live Journal for people who want to blog and who want to read some independent news. We have Gazeta and Lenta for people who want to read some editorial news about what's happening in the world and in Russia. We have Afisha for the ones who love entertainment. We have Championat for the ones who love sports. So a lot of brands, and I'm not mentioning all of them obviously because there are more than 20, but every single brand has its own identity and has its own loyal audience. How do we keep track of everything that's going on all of those websites? Same as basically Vion does. We have one and the same, I would say, platform, one and the same technological backend for all of the media websites that we own and basically all of the services as well that we own. So we see the people across all of those websites. We see everything that they do. We look at their cookies, so basically we understand anything that they're doing online, and same as Vion, we can address the audience with the right advertising campaigns, we can address the audience with the right recommendations if it comes to this, and basically, unlike a company, unlike a dozen of companies that would have their own independent brands, we do have independent brands that serve to the customer, but as a company, we're completely united. So basically, on the back end, it's one project, but on the front end, for the people, it's 25 plus projects that everyone has its own identity and everyone has its own loyal audience. And I think this is the way to go forward by giving, and I would even guess that not everyone in this audience knew that Rambler Group has Afisha, Lenta, Gazeta, Championat, Live Journal, everything combined in it. So I would even guess. So who knew before I told it that this is all part of one group? So you see, like much less than even 10% of the audience.
A biased
so,
audience.
Yeah, no one knew that this is one group, because for the users we don't make it obvious. You as a user, you don't need to know this, but we as a company, we're still technologically united. It's one and the same platform that gets all the big data, and big data gets to use in us. So basically, Vion uses big data to understand what happens to the relationship between two young people. We use this big data to serve better ads. So it's completely pragmatic for us. We just use all of this data that comes to us about your behavior online, about what you use, about what you do on our websites, and we just give you the advertising which is most relevant to you, so that you click with more priority and get the advertising dollars for us. So that's still pragmatic for us.
Okay, did you want to jump in?
I think the WeChat thing is fascinating because I think it speaks as well to culture. So one reflection that I've heard and I would say experienced is if you've been to China and think about your experience in China, one story is the language is exceptionally complex. So that's one level of or view into what I would say is the culture within China's ability to deal with a lot of information, and then two, just even walking down the street in Shanghai, Beijing, Hong Kong especially, you're just inundated with such amount. It's like walking through Times Square everywhere, right? If anybody knows Times Square is a reference in New York, sorry. And so the reflection there is that from a product standpoint, is that they're able to digest and deal with just an immense amount of information in one interface, whereas I think the trend that you're describing here in Russia is very similar to the US. I mean, even thinking about Foursquare, I don't know if Foursquare is popular here.
It's operating here. Yes.
Okay, so Foursquare is a location-based game, effectively. They actually split their app into two. So there's Foursquare and Swarm, and so that kind of even perpetuates that storyline.
That's a great point. The Chinese people somehow they're much more used to this clutter and to actually digesting and going through it and getting the right information from them. Every time we try to get as much feedback as possible when we introduce new advertising formats, introduce new banners on our website and stuff, and people start complaining. Still new banner, another one. It's all crowded. I can see any content, and the only thing I can say is just go to any Chinese website, any Chinese media website. You'll see a small window of content, and then everything else is advertising, and it's popping out, it's flashing, it's completely crazy, but they're okay with it. It's completely different mentality and completely different type of and pattern of consuming, digesting the information, which is probably just cultural.
Okay, and I suppose the Chinese like order, the Russians like chaos, and on that note of chaos, I think it's time that we move over to your questions from the floor. So I'm not sure where the microphone is, but those of you who would, where is the microphone? Do we have one? Or if people could put up their hands, we have a gentleman in the front row there. Give him a microphone? Yes. Okay. Great.
Yeah. Good day. Main questions are for commercial real estate market and digitalization evolution of it. Main question is how we can commercialize in commercial real estate sector during the digital evolution of business.
I think that would be a question for. Does anyone want to jump in there? I'm no commercial real estate specialist.
So I like this one. I actually did a project years and years ago around real estate. My wife actually used to be in real estate as an agent, and to be just exceptionally harsh, one could say that the agent is going to go away, or a more optimistic way to look at it is the role of the agent is going to change dramatically, right? So the idea of buying a home or apartment, if we're talking about buying or renting, I guess it doesn't really matter. Buying more so than renting is, at least the first time you do it, exceptionally stressful.
That's a bit different. The question was about commercial real estate, so it's a bit different. You're talking about residential. So residential one has been really disrupted by the industry, and we have a lot of companies and startups that are doing this. Commercial, on the other hand, has not been disrupted at all, and that's a good question. Actually, I would not even know how to answer it. So probably commercial real estate, as any B2B business, not a B2C business, it lags behind in terms of disruption, because obviously it's okay if you have very few interactions, not like with the user, but between two companies. It's okay to still have them in the mailbox, over the phone. So you don't need very complex apps or services to actually handle this thing. So I think one type of disruption that will come from the Internet of Things, everything that happens with VR technologies and being able to see basically the shopping mall or the business center before it's even been built. That's the thing that will completely disrupt the industry. But in terms of the services, I don't think really it needs to be disrupted. So basically you can't disrupt a negotiation between two businessmen. I don't think it will be gone soon.
I would disagree. I think commercial real estate is under huge threat. Let's say in Beeline we have a program called Be Free, where our employees don't have to work from the office. So lots of people are working from home. In terms of demand, we have a number of call center agents who respond from home. So from this perspective, demand for commercial real estate is really impacted already by digital economy. Similar, this is one example. Another example on what I was saying about the stores, which we have. Our stores are also commercial real estate, and all the leases and rents are much shorter right now because people's behavior is very much changing. This is the second threat. And the third one, if you're looking at the ways how cities used to be before, people used to live in the suburbs and commuting to the cities. Nowadays, people live in the city and work in the same place, And even government of Moscow is commissioning lots of projects for us, even specifically what to put in the kind of residential areas to turn residential areas more into the business-friendly environment. So it is a huge threat for commercial real estate, and the threat comes from the changing of people's behavior, from the business perspective, from operational perspective, and mix of residential and commercial.
So now I can jump on this because now I've been corrected and realigned. So yes, 100%. So what I would say is, another way to frame that is a lot of established companies are also laying people off, right? So they're downsizing their operation. All of that just means they need less square footage, right? And you're leveraging as a business, I think your example of the call center or some employees, you're leveraging their home, which is actually super cool, right? And so I think in there is actually an opportunity. So there's now new businesses, if you want to talk about IoT or drones, thinking about drones as opportunity for new technologies to enhance perhaps the experience of a commercial real estate broker selling or leasing to somebody. How does that improve that experience about information? I think the other piece is just thinking about the future of retail, which at the onset of that you could think of it as things like Amazon or anything that is purely online. But actually in the United States, look at what Amazon is doing. They bought a company called Whole Foods, which is a retailer of food. It's a grocery store. And they're not only looking at it as a retail space, but also as a distribution center, right? And so they're reformatting retail. And there's a ton of small companies that are cropping up that are, to your point, looking for shorter term leases. I only need to be here for a season. I only need to be here for a few months. And so I think in the threat, there's an opportunity. If most of the narrative around commercial real estate is about handcuffing me, the company, to a long-term lease, nobody likes that, right? And so it's an opportunity for somebody to be thoughtful, reflective of the needs of what the new economy are going to bring, and maybe change the lease structure or split up a property, or don't build more malls in the suburbs because everyone's moving out of the suburbs and moving into the city. All those trends are incredibly accurate, and we see a lot of this happening in the United States right now, big time.
Okay, so next question, hands up, please. Okay, it's already been chosen for us.
Good day to you. Thank you very much for this amazing lecture. I would like to hear your opinion on this quote, on this trend that we have nowadays, that the person is becoming a brand, that a human is becoming a brand, and how an individual would be able to adapt, and which ways of this adaptation do you see for the individual in this development, in this trend, when an individual has become...
How important is it for us as people to have personal brands, and what does that mean for the way that we behave in the world today? If anyone wants
that was a question directed to me? Oh, yeah. Correct. I don't think much about personal brand. But I will say, if you think about a personal brand as like a micro brand, I think, ask me the question again. How do we think about personal brands?
Well, is it an important part of being a human being? Is it something that one needs to be to function in society?
Okay, well, I guess one way to look at that is we've always needed that, right? It's I don't know about you guys growing up, but my father would always tell me about think about the friends that you have, right? Because that's going to drive much of your career and much of your life. And so effectively, in a way, that's thinking about your personal brand. Who do you associate with, which is literally a brand storyline. So I don't think we're, again, going back to your reinventing the wheel, like that's kind of reinventing the wheel a little bit. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if I have much more to say on personal brand.
Yep. The personal brand is very interesting. Yeah, this is what differentiates you from the crowd. But be very careful how far away you can stretch it. And I'll give you a personal example. I have a chip built in my hand because I want to present the image that's so innovative and so cool. Yeah, it's kind of really nice one. And when you go into Mendeleev bar, one of those hipster places, and you pay in the bar with your hands, versus a telephone or watch. It's really impressive. You're like cyborg, yeah? And trust me, guys, you have no chance to compete, yeah? But when you're stretching it to extreme, when it goes absolutely outside of the limits, it actually pushes the boundaries. I'll give you another example with the same chip. I'm going to the metro, and I went to the metro a couple of months ago, metro in Moscow, and I'm going to the metro, and I didn't have my telephone with me, and I just paid with my chip in the metro. The door opened, and I just went through this, all very nice. But when I arrived to the bottom of the metro station, kind of 4 police officers were waiting for me, and I had to explain to them that being a vice president of Beeline, I'm not trying to steal 55 rubles and all this stuff. So think about the brand which you're building, yeah? Sometimes it's very exciting, sometimes it's very cool, but know how far you can stretch it.
Well, yeah, he knows when your girlfriend's going to dump you. He knows how to impress girls in the bar by paying with your hand. So anyone needs relationship advice, ask this guy. But let's move on to the next question. Does anyone already have a microphone, or do I have to? Apparently, we're running out of time because we still have. So we're going to end the questions for now, but you will have a chance to ask more questions later after Charles gives his lecture. So let's move on to that. And thank you all very much once again for coming. It's been a fascinating discussion with 3 very smart people, and it's been great to do this for all of you.
All right. You guys ready to hear some stories? Thank you guys for coming out. Thank everybody who organized the event for inviting me out to Moscow. I've had an incredible day so far touring this amazing city. Quick reintroduction. My name is Charles. Yes, I co-founded Kickstarter back in 2009, which really actually started in 2006. But I'm also a couple of other things. I'm a designer. I'm responsible for designing and architecting the platform. Also, I guess a bit of a technologist or hacker, but I also do other things like cyclist and runner, have a family, all those things. So I figured I'd just paint a little bit of a personal picture. What I want to talk a little bit about tonight is kind of along the theme of what we were talking about in the panel. Maybe we'll get into some more of this with the Q&A, which is ultimately about, sweet, it works, change. We're in this incredibly intense moment. And I would say that we've been brewing towards this intense moment for about 40 years now, at least from the lens of my own life. 40 years from the 1960s in the United States was a moment of intense cultural revolution and new ideas and new thinking. It also happened to be the period in which we started to work towards what we now know of today as the internet. And so all of this pent-up energy, all of this pent-up creativity, all of this pent-up excitement, what I would say was empowered by the internet, the web, and now mobile devices, empowered by technology, not driven by it. So I like to use this little image that I took, this little video, and ask a question: is this art or is this a product, right? I couldn't even answer that question for you because there was a product designer creating an art project which, quite frankly, is likely to lead to a product. Anybody familiar with Rafa? Any cyclists in the audience? So is this a coffee shop or a clothing store? And the answer is yes, it's both of those things. And I think what this gets into is this mixing of metaphors, or this mixing of media, or this mixing of stuff, this mixing up. We're in this great mixed up time. Rafa is one little example of kind of pushing that envelope forward. Is this a home or a hotel? And the answer is yes, it's Airbnb, right? Are they a hotel or a service that allows me to travel all around the world and stay in someone's home? And the answer would be yes. And I would say the world looks very, very, very mixed up. And I think that's fascinating. Is this a office? You see a guy in a sports suit in the background. I wonder if he's actually the one running the print on this Ultimaker. So is this an office or is this a prototyping lab, right? Or is this a future manufacturing plant? And the answer would be yes, it's both of those things. We're in this world of change where definitions are getting switched around, where divisions are getting broken up. And And so another way to look at this is through the lens of Kickstarter. Is this a product, or is this how things are funded nowadays, through community, right? And the answer would be yes on that front too. All right, so I think I sort of alluded to this a little bit earlier with the Statue of Liberty story, but I think it's really important for any entrepreneur, anybody that's sort of pushing a boundary, whether you're a designer, an artist, a technologist, to look back at time, find inspiration from the moments before us. How are we reinventing things that have been done in the past? We are actually, in fact, always doing that. And so the story that I want to tell is a little bit of my personal story, as well as a story of Kickstarter itself, sort of the influence that we each had on the founding of this company. All right, so on your right, that is me. That is my sister on your left. Pretty normal kid, sort of. I would say I'm mostly a loner. Grew up incredibly interested in the fringe. So what I'm talking about in the fringe in the 70s and 80s was punk rock, electronic dance music, music with computers, thinking about the graffiti movement, at least as it was burgeoning in New York and Brooklyn and the Bronx and Queens, interested in breakdancing and beatboxing and that whole kind of world. And so the best way that I could kind of describe myself more than an outsider was a bit of a loser and a rebel. So I didn't really have a lot of friends, constrained by the little suburb that I was living in. But I was an outsider. I was into what I would say is a community of creators, punk rock, electronic dance music, technology, that were pushing the boundaries, right? And part of that upbringing, part of that sort of isolation led me into punk rock. And in that structure, in that culture, in that subgenre, there's very much this kind of anti-establishment narrative. So I was very, sort of a punk rock disruptive little kid. And we lived by this mantra that rules were always meant to be broken, and we're the ones to break them. We'll come back to that towards the end. So now we're getting into what I would say is the story of Kickstarter, the things that we were fighting against, the things that we were opposing, right? And so if you think about that time, and I think in Russia you probably went through a very similar kind of storyline in terms of the Industrial Revolution, where effectively everything in our lives became industrialized. We love to think about the efficiency of things, right? And so we built factories to produce more, to sell more, right? We then created beep, boop, boop, work environments. We put people in factories, right? Which feels actually quite inhumane this day and age. Thank God there are robots that can actually do some of these jobs for us. And so we put ourselves and put people into industrialized situations. As a designer working in an agency, I also realized that I was just a silly little kitten sitting in an agency doing the work of big corporations. I was effectively put into an industrial environment to churn out creative work. It actually felt very inhumane and in most days very uncreative, right? And, I'd say for the three of us, what we were fighting against was this industrialization of the creative industry or creative industries. Think about film, journalism, writing, product design, and so forth. And the thing that we were very frustrated by was the fact that the results of this industrialization led to fewer and fewer unique ideas coming into the market. I'll use one little example. Anybody familiar with this film from, I think it was the 80s or maybe early 90s, Die Hard? Die Hard, you guys remember Die Hard and Bruce Willis? Yeah, okay, cool. Well, anybody heard of the film The Bourne Identity? Maybe a more modern film? Guess what? The story is almost identical. Watch them again. They're almost identical. And what's interesting is they're both fascinating films, different characters, different eras, but the same film. Pretty boring. We wanted new ideas, new storylines, new plots, new characters. And we felt that the establishment, sort of the industrialization of, in that case, the film industry, were keeping all of these crazy new ideas out of the market, right? Out of our hands, out of the stories of our lives. So enter Kickstarter, empowering creative people to produce creative work at any scale, right? That was sort of our mandate, our drive. So now we've got Kickstarter. We launched on April 28th of 2009. We're, what is that, 9 years old at this point? Almost a decade old. And one of the things that I think is really unfortunate about success is we usually look at the things that were most successful. We talked a little bit about this during the interviews earlier. What was the biggest project? And we'll get to the biggest project. But I think the thing that's really most important as an entrepreneur, hopefully speaking to an audience of other entrepreneurs or artists or creative people, is that very first step is sometimes the toughest. And it's the step that I think sits with you as an artist or a creative person forever. And so the story I first want to start with to share is literally the very first campaign that got funded on Kickstarter. This was early 2009. We hadn't seen any major successes yet. We had probably been a couple of weeks old at this point, so maybe we were bleeding into May. And this was a project by a person named Dark Pony. So for one, pseudonymity on the internet is amazing. Because I love the fact that I don't know whether Dark Pony is a he, a she, or somewhere kind of creatively in between. But Dark Pony had a very simple project. They wanted to draw something in exchange for money that you would provide them, right? The goal for Dark Pony was a total of $15. Obviously, this was in the very early days, somebody kind of experimentally using this thing called Kickstarter. And in traditional Kickstarter fashion, if you guys are familiar with the platform as all or nothing, meaning you have to at least break your goal, but you can go as high as you need to go. Dark Pony blew the doors off of his or her goal. From 3 people, raised $35, right? So originally 15, ended up raising 35, distributed these 3 drawings to 3 amazing people around the country. Super cool. Very basic start. So $35. A couple of months later, there's a woman called Allison Weiss. Now, what's interesting about Allison Weiss was she was funding an album. This was her very first album, I believe, for herself. But what was she by day? She was a student in the middle of Athens, Georgia, so in the middle of the United States, and she was studying graphic design. So here's a design student making music who wanted to fund an album. What I think is really interesting about that is what right does she have to make music? Well, she has all the right in the world because she's a creative human, creative individual. Well, she wanted to raise $2,000 just to get that album printed and out into the market. She actually crossed that line within 24 hours. So $2,000 in this day and age, 9 years later in Kickstarter land, may not seem like a lot, but in that moment for us as founders with no team around us, watching this girl that nobody knew in Athens, Georgia, raise $2,000 in 12 hours blew us away. And we're like, how the hell did that just happen? Well, what was interesting is she taught us something. If you guys are familiar with the concept of a stretch goal, it basically comes back to Allison. So Allison started realizing that she had 30 days left to fund her campaign. So why not raise more money, do more stuff? She created the concept of a stretch goal, which was simply put in her project. If anybody at this point, she'd raised a couple $1,000s over. One of her stretch goals was if anybody gets us over, whoever gets us over $6,000, she'll get on Skype with them, right? So there was a sort of incentive to keep people along, entertained, and raise her capital. She ended up raising $7,000, touring around the country. She made it into Billboard, and she's a very well-known singer-songwriter now in the United States. So a very romantic story coming from effectively nothing and running several Kickstarter campaigns. So anybody familiar with Pebble? Anybody wearing a Pebble? Cool, Pebble. Okay, so we talked a lot about like big projects, successful projects. This kind of fits into that category. And mind you, this was their second project. So this is Pebble Time, I believe it was called. And this was run in 2015. We started out with $35, moved up to $7,000, which was super bloody awesome. Pebble, this project in particular, went on to raise $20 million. That was after a $13 million campaign, and they did a third campaign which raised somewhere around $10 to $13 million as well. So crazy, crazy story. Running the spectrum from, I would guess what I would say with Dark Pony, maybe amateur art, to artist, Allison, to technology with Eric and the team at Pebble. Then there's this other project that is, I think, maybe a little bit more abstractly interesting. And I think gets back into what I would say is the humble roots of Kickstarter, empowering creative projects of all kinds. So this was a project that was called Viper. It was run by these 5 high school and middle school students. So they ranged in the age of 15 or 11 to 15, 11 to 18. And what they wanted to do was create a flight simulator. And so if you can see one of the kids sitting in the background, sitting in the cockpit of a little plane. They wanted to turn that into a flight simulator. I do not know about you guys in the audience, but when I was their age, I was definitely not thinking about building a flight simulator. I was probably thinking about everything but that, right? Girls and skateboards and punk rock. What was interesting about this campaign was as they were raising the funds, and as I was obsessing over this project, as one does when there's somebody using your platform, there was a little subtle comment from a woman who happened to be a mother that was backing the campaign. So she gave these guys money to build their dream of building a flight simulator. What the comment was that she was explaining why she was backing this project. And I think it says something about humanity. I think it says something hopefully about all of us. It says something very greatly about what we believe at Kickstarter to be true, and ultimately why we built the platform. What she was describing in her intention of backing these 5 kids was that her hope was that someday somebody would do the same for her kids, that they would pay it forward, right? And that struck me, that choked me up. It still chokes me up actually today, which is to say she's interested in the flight simulator. That's super cool. But what she saw was tenacity. What she saw was courage. What she saw was this potential in these kids that she hoped somebody else would see in her kids as she does herself, right? And so what I think that if you would abstract and think about what that few dollars was that she gave these 5 kids to make this project was about faith, was about love, was about humanity, right? It was much more than the money. So as much as we can get obsessed and excited about $20 million and the things that we make, I think every one of these projects, and this was fascinating for me as I talked to every one of these folks that were running campaigns and backing campaigns, is that same behavior, that same motivation. They want to be part of something. It's sort of a sense of belonging and a sense of love, or an extension of that feeling that bonds people together. And that is at the core, the root of what makes Kickstarter Kickstarter. Okay, so I'll admit something. Maybe you guys know this. I left Kickstarter in the end of 2013, beginning of 2014 to figure out what was next. I knew something about myself, that I was very interested in creative process. I was interested in how somebody made music, and interested in how somebody made art. I was interested in how somebody brings products into the world, right? I was interested in that creative spirit, and how beyond Kickstarter, beyond capital from community, where in the creative cycle, in the creative process, where there's still issues, right? How do we make it easier for more creative people to produce more stuff? And so there's this story of Sisyphus, sort of a Greek mythology story. And this is sort of a funny little image, Lego block image of Sisyphus pushing a rock up the hill, for that rock to perpetually over infinity fall back down, so Sisyphus can push that rock back up a hill again. And that, to me, is the creative journey. That is the entrepreneurial journey. That is the journey of an artist bringing new work into the world. And so in that journey, in that difficulty, there's got to be ways that we can make it easier, right? And so I'll admit one other thing, which was I dropped out of university back in the 90s. Before working on software and design, I was studying mechanical engineering. Maybe some of you guys can relate to that. And so when I think about myself leaving university, this massive institution with massive assets, with an amazing array of tools, the moment that I stepped foot outside of that school, I lost access to all that equipment. I still had all of my enthusiasm. I still had all of my intellect. I was still connected to a group of creative people, but I had no tools to express those ideas, right? I couldn't afford all of the equipment, the CNC machines and so forth that I had access to. as we were talking about this earlier, as the cities become denser and denser, prices are going to go up. So can we collectively pitch into space to make the space that we need to create the future more accessible? And then the last thing was about knowledge. Knowledge all over the internet, but guaranteed there's a massive amount of knowledge sitting all amongst you, right? And how do we connect in real time, in real place, to further our creative practice? And so I started a little experiment, started a little experiment in the summer of 2015, which was effectively a workshop that was designed for ambitious creative folks. Whether you're an entrepreneur, whether you're an artist, whether you're a designer, I wanted to bring in a multidisciplinary set of people to create their imagination, to share knowledge amongst one another. And it was purely experimental. I even ran a little Kickstarter campaign to fund part of it, super awesome. And it was a little 1-month pop-up retail space. As we were talking about the question earlier about commercial real estate, I used this space for a month as an art project effectively. Here it is in the background. You can romantically see what used to be called the Sears Tower in the background. So this is in the city of Chicago. This is a little building that would be the first incarnation of Lost Arts, basically an experimental lab for folks creating new projects, products, and art. Some amazing things happened in the space. Actually, things got made, both art, technology, even I'd say the technology of a boat. So somebody built a boat in the course of that month. Community happened. People started, when you gave them collective space and gave them a mission to create an object of their fancy, suddenly you're creating in a communal environment. You're going to talk to the person sitting next to you. You guys are probably going to do that at the bar after this. And so suddenly connections are made, right? And so where does that all go? And I was inspired by all of the activity that was happening in a very short 4-week period in a very hot, sweaty, smelly, un-air-conditioned space in the center of Chicago. And so we built another one. Closed that after a month, and a year later we built what I would say is the prototype. If the first one was a proof of concept, really spiriting around the idea of interdisciplinary work, cross-disciplinary work, I wanted to build another version. Is there a business in here? So we built a prototype, a bigger space, moving from 4,000 square feet to 25,000 square feet with greater tools, more visibility, and a longer period of time, right? And so some amazing things happened in this space, from civic art projects over in the upper right, this is a prototype of some app-controlled lights, civic art project that would go downtown Chicago, that every one of you could be an artist and interact with these lights that are connected to the internet. Kind of amazing. To board games that actually ended up getting funded on Kickstarter but prototyped in the space. To new cookware. To a video game that was physically based, so using the city as your game board. So some pretty fascinating projects that were sort of pushing the boundaries of product, pushing the boundaries of culture. And then there's this third phase that we're building up to, but I can't talk about it. So we've been in hiatus. I shut that space down after a year, and we're now moving into a new reflection, sort of building what I would say is a network of these spaces. But there's this other little secret sauce that we're starting to build. So I can't really talk about that now. Maybe in a year you can have me back and I can talk a little bit about what that thing will be, perhaps. It'll be awesome. So, shh, you never saw this. All right. So I think there's one aspect of these entrepreneurial journeys that I think is really important. We talk about it a lot, which is this idea of failure, right? But, failure is such like a negative word, right? It sort of spoils people's ability to even just get started in the first place, right? And I think there's a problem with that in the sense that we need to create a culture and a narrative that empowers more and more people to push the boundaries and push themselves to get their own projects out there. And so I think perhaps in a realm, a way to make that a little bit easier is a reframing of this old statement that I had started with. Right? That rules were meant to be broken. It certainly sounds very anti-establishment. It sounds very aggressive. Maybe it comes from the sort of punk rock in me. But that was a title or a term that was very appropriate in my teens and my 20s, right? I'm now 44. I'm a little bit older, maybe a little bit softer. And in reflecting on who I am now, which is still that punk rock little kid trying to push boundaries and enabling others to push boundaries so that we can all kind of move forward, there was this realization that I had, which is the fact that the rules that were in place were always very feeble anyway, and they were constantly getting changed and turned anyway. It just took longer for those cycles to happen, right? And those cycles are happening far quicker right now, right? And that's scary for some. I actually find that to be incredibly empowering and exciting. But in reframing this sort of statement, make it a little bit easier and acceptable for more people to try new things and put themselves out there and push themselves further into creating their own, to the question during the Q&A, to push their own personal brand, perhaps. Can we look at this in the sense that rules are just temporary, right? And enabling more of us, if we just reframe the statement or reframe the question that is more empowering and inviting to folks to create a new rule for a new tomorrow, that seems far more empowering. And so I suppose the question for me to you guys in the audience is, what is it in your heart that you're trying to just get out there in the world, and what's holding you back? Because quite frankly, I don't think anything should be. We're in a moment of great change, and in a moment of great change, we need more ideas to make that change possible. So, thank you. So, how do we want to handle Q&A?
That'd be great. Okay, so there are people with microphones yes. So why don't you? So if you this gentleman who's sitting next to the camera, could we get him a mic? No, behind a little, yeah, back there.
Keep your hands up.
Okay. Thank you for this wonderful presentation, and especially I loved your slides because they're amazing. And the question I wanted to ask you was a continuation of what was discussed before. That we discussed that social networks like Facebook and VK and so on, they just use our data and don't give anything for it. And what do you think about new projects like OME who would pay to the users for using their data?
I don't know that I think about how, what you're saying is how can, say, some future company or some of those companies change the model so they pay you for the data
change the
they're
model
using?
of monetization and pay users for every data they get from them, that even if you do nothing, you earn some money for someone use your behavior in the net.
Yep. You're not going to like this response, but effectively, you are getting paid for it because it's a free service, right? And that's not a great answer. I think what you're hinting at is actually quite interesting, which is how is there a better value exchange, right? And it may not be that Facebook pays you, but can the value exchange be better? And I think that's actually quite fascinating. There's a company called Ello, E-L-L-O, in the United States. I don't know that it's actually gone much further beyond the United States. That is what I would say is a micro version of Facebook, highly curated, that removes a lot of what I would say is like the big scale issues that Facebook is under and is then reflected back to us, the users, right? And so it's a much more tightly knit group of people. There is advertising in that mechanism, in that community, but it is highly curated to that community. And so I think we're going to start seeing more things like that, or more things in the vein of what you're asking, which is a reaction. Actually, maybe it goes back to your question before of, God, do we need another social network? Well, maybe to your question, we kind of do. That has different ethics and different ideals in terms of what is their business model. So yeah.
So. Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
If we go to the lady next to you over there, we could, yes.
Thank you. Hello, my name is Maya. We see that today there are two separate trends. The first trend is that we see more and more digital experience, VR experience, and internet penetration goes further in Russia, and more people like and are excited of this digital experience. But on the other hand, more and more people refuse to be online. They appreciate offline experience, and we see that often startups that gives some service for offline experience, like Uber, Airbnb, they are just supporting really truthful offline experiences, and offline actually and reality rules. So what do you think is stronger? Virtual reality and these virtual things, or on the other hand, real experience? Your project connects this offline experience and digital service. So maybe you have some thoughts about this in long term.
I'm excited about the topics in your question. I would say that I don't take sides, which is to say, I think like VR, AR, all of that stuff actually is like really interesting, right? How does it again augment our existence? Which, by the way, computers and technology, meaning the bicycle, has always already done anyway, right? A bicycle is effectively augmenting our ability to get somewhere. And yet I think the reality is it doesn't mean that like the real world is going to go away. Like we're all sitting here in the same room, right? My voice is augmented technology, and I think these are important notes, right? Like we've always been in this moment, and always been, I would argue, like grappling with some of these questions. Even the story of Rafa that I'd mentioned earlier, I think is an interesting one in the vein of what I'm building now with Lost Arts. Is it speaks to the future of retail, right? So Rafa started out as basically just a website selling amazing cycling clothing. You could relate that back in time to mail order catalog. The catalog just happened to be on the website, right? So we've been here before. Then, sort of going on the commentary that George had made earlier, in terms of how they're finding new retail spaces. So they realized that there was a number of people that were ordering in New York. What if we opened a store in New York, right? Then it gives the folks that are in New York a place to be. And we know that the clothing that we're selling is expensive. Maybe that means we're going to attract more people. So what did they do? In 2011 or 2012, I think it was, they opened a 3-month pop-up in New York just to test that idea. Very lightweight. And so I think what that's getting into is this much more of a hybrid model, which is, playing on the internet, playing online, having mobile-first buying capacity, but also knowing that we do need physical environments, and we do want them. They just don't need to look the same way that they've done in the past. So I would side on both, and I find the question as a separation interesting, and maybe my attraction to both also interesting. Yeah.
So don't you think that people will separate to those who prefer online, being online? No? You think that combination?
No, not at all. I mean, I think your example of Airbnb and Uber are great, which is like they are native to the internet, but they're leveraging both and to create an experience offline. Think about, there's another company in the United States that actually got bought by WeWork. I don't know if you guys are familiar with WeWork here, called Meetup, right? And I was always fascinated with Meetup because it was using the value of the internet to go hang out in the real world, right? Which again goes into the intersection of the question that you're asking. That's just my interest personally. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much.
There are two ladies over there in the corner who've both got their hands up. If we could go to one of them, or maybe even both, that would be great. So let's pass the microphone down.
This is like crowdsourcing.
Yeah.
Like the runner doesn't want to run, and so we're using. That's awesome. Cool.
Добрый день, Чарльз.
Charles.
I'm sorry, but I actually met one of the women next to you.
Okay.
And now you're curating. Yeah,
Yes.
That's awesome.
Я сделал маленькую
I made
инвестицию
this small
недавно через
investment
Kickstarter.
not so long ago through the
И,
Kickstarter, and
стартап
in a startup
микробот
which is
сенсор.
called Microbot Sensor.
Я его жду, что ему
I'm waiting
он
for
ко мне
it to
придет,
come to me, to
А
be
в связи
sent
с
to
этим у
me.
меня
In this
такой
regard,
вопрос.
I have this
Где
question.
все-таки
Where
разница?
Because
exactly?
I need to translate for Charles what your question is.
А где разница
What
между
is the difference between
новой
the
разработкой
new
и
development
способом
and
продать
the
уже
way to
имеющийся
sell
товар?
the already existing product?
Делаете ли вы
Are you making any
предварительный анализ,
preliminary?
We're going to translate it for him anyway. Okay.
что это новая разработка?
Just 1 second, please. Just let him put the device on.
Можете вопрос повторить, пожалуйста?
Сначала, да? Я сделал
So I made a small
инвестицию через
Kickstarter investment.
Скоро мне
Soon
прислать
they will send me my amazing microbot sensor.
И вот
And
вопрос
in
заключается
this
в том,
regards, my question is as follows.
есть ли
If
разница,
the
проводите ли
difference,
вы анализ,
do
что
you
это
carry out an
действительно
analysis
новая
on the
разработка,
difference between
или это
a
метод
product that's being
продажи
a truly new one,
уже
a novel
имеющегося
product,
товара?
or is this just
И как
a
вы
way
делаете
of
вот
selling a
этот
product that already
анализ, и
exists?
как вы
How do you
разделяете?
carry out this analysis to determine the novelty of the product, and how do you differentiate in this regards?
Wow. Okay. So I think I'm getting this correctly. This is always an interesting game of telephone. I would say one thing that's really important to note about Kickstarter is the analysis part, which is to say we expect the crowd to judge whether a project is novel and worth funding. And so if the project that you backed you felt was worth funding, you're the judge, not me, right? And if it actually gets to raise all of its capital, then that collection of people or that crowd has judged that thing worthy of being made and then distributed. The interesting area is once you receive the thing, does it live up to your expectation, right? And then there's another interesting thing as manufacturing ends up becoming much, much faster. Is by the time that object gets to you, after you've funded it, is it even interesting anymore, right? Which we haven't even touched on actually in this whole discussion, but which gets into the sort of future of manufacturing and speed to market, I think is going to be really, really interesting territory over the next 20, 30 years. So hopefully that answers your question.
If you look at most of the businesses that I cover, so like one of the most interesting is Sberbank, which is Russia's biggest bank,
Totally.
and I saw them a couple months ago, and they were very proud that they so like the head of Sberbank and the deputy head, they went to the first game of the World Cup where Russia won 5-0, and they came up with some like soccer related promo over a loan product, and it was out the next morning.
Really?
And yeah, they were
that's
really
awesome.
pleased about
Yeah,
this.
totally.
Okay,
That's
so next
awesome.
question we have from over there. No, in the back where you were. No. I wasn't trying to give these two ladies the chance to ask a question, and no one will let them do it. Thank you.
Well done.
Finally. Thank you. Hi, my name is Anya.
Hello.
And I was listening to what you said at the end of your speech, where you were talking about innovation and moving forward with things. And I am right now thinking about innovation in the medical field, not by choice, unfortunately, by circumstance, because I've been a patient of a certain problem all over the world, and in the United States, and in Europe, and in Russia, and I realized that I couldn't find an answer to my problem. The medical field is pretty limited in what I'm looking for. I realized that I have to come up with answers myself, and I have to come up with innovative technologies and materials. Now, I'm not a computer person, I'm a designer, so I don't know where to look for the answers. And I wrote to Ministry of Health today, actually, of Russian Health, to point me in the right direction to find people. You as an innovator, where do you find people to delegate your the solution of your problems? Like you say, okay, I need to resolve this. Yeah, I need to invent this material. Where do I find a person that is capable of doing that?
Yeah, that's a perpetual question, right? Meaning, I know there's a solution, but I don't know how to make the solution, right? So I should say I'm not a computer scientist either, right? I'm a designer, but I'm a self-taught designer. I'm also a self-taught programmer, arguably, and my team could relate to this, not a very good one, right? So I did not build Kickstarter. We hired 3 engineers to code Kickstarter. I think one thing to note, at least within the community that I tend to be a part of from an entrepreneurial standpoint, is kind of like the story of the thread here of Kickstarter and the thread of Lost Arts is I'm hanging out with engineers and designers and artists and business people. Like, that's my posse, right? And so for me, it's like finding an engineer. I just look to my left and there's an engineer, or I look to my right and there's a business person, or I look to my left and there's a better designer than I am. And so I think for one is, I think there's and excuse my focus on this, but the term delegate, right? I would say to change that into like, how do I bring people into what I'm building? And I think that's a really important note, because until you've built the thing, you don't know if it's actually useful or valuable. And so likely you're going to find a lot of inspiration or insight from that engineer or from that other designer through the process. And so if you invite them in to work on it with you, it's a different, sort of a different type of relationship. That's number one. I think number two, how do you find them, I think is your core problem. I would imagine the Ministry of Health is more clueless than you are about where to find these folks. But I would say, quite frankly, come to events like this, right? And share the thing that you're working on. I mean, I think one fascinating way to attract people to an idea is to share the idea. And whether it's sharing it here or posting it on Medium or posting it onto the internet to talk about the problem that you're trying to solve, suddenly you find people gravitating to you because you invited them into the solution. And so not looking at it as sort of the old school way of like, here's my business card, I'm looking for a programmer, are you a programmer? But more socializing the idea and finding people that are going to come to you. Not a great answer, but not an easy answer, but I think that's one way to approach it.
Okay, I'm afraid we've got more people who want to ask questions as usual than we have time for. So if anyone wants to ask a very quick question, that lady over there, yeah. Please keep it quick if you can.
Yeah, good evening. When we talk about business, we usually mention target audience. If you want to have a great project, then you have to identify your target audience first. But one of Russian famous bloggers recently said that target audience is a myth, and marketing managers usually use it just to explain their expenses. Do you agree? Do you agree with that? And what can we do to identify target audience more specifically? And what comes first, the project, the product, or the target audience?
I like that framing of the question, actually. So I would say that this blogger is both right and wrong. What I mean to say by that is this person was probably reacting to, say, a traditional mindset of marketing and messaging and whatnot. And I think that world is dead. I think I'm assuming what they're probably speaking about is more in what I would say is like a more modern way to look at target audience. Just sounds very harsh, right? But who are the people that you're trying to serve? It kind of goes back to the previous question. Who are the people that you're trying to serve? And how does your product interface with them? I would say to the last kind of reflection question, which I certainly would say that I have some bias towards. So I'm a product designer at the end of the day. So I would say like you need a product, right? That fits the need of a community of people. And that community of people will be your target audience to start. The reality is that target audience hopefully changes over time, right? Grows, right? So if I can talk about it through the lens of Kickstarter, hopefully it becomes somewhat apparent through the narrative, is the first couple of years was predominantly arts. That's where we started. And then very quickly, a couple of other categories came about. One was product design, as we saw with Pebble, right? The other was video games. So video games is a community of people. You know, I play video games. I grew up playing video games, but I don't make video games. So I'm not part of that community. I didn't know the hardships of what it took to bring a video game out in the market. But they knew, and they found Kickstarter, and they started utilizing it. And so suddenly we're serving another market. I would say the target audience, the narrative, the persona, right, is still very similar. Like the needs and the attitudes of those folks were very similar. So I would say, you know, I get what, I'm curious now to read this blog post. I get what they're kind of pushing up against, which is traditional marketing, and thinking more socially about who it is that you're serving. But I think that interface is still really important. Yeah.
Okay, I think we got one more. So there's the gentleman in the back. There are two gentlemen in the back, so you're going to have to fight over it, I'm afraid. Sorry.
Yeah, hi, my name is Dmitry. Thanks you for being here tonight. And what you're saying in the Lost Starts is actually going back to what was discussed before in the panel discussion, is about innovation management. And my question is, do you believe actually that research and development that built inside the corporations could innovate in a really disruptive way? And how can you elaborate on how to build them in this environment?
This was about R&D within established companies? Is that
Yeah, but more R&D like when you don't know what you do and you hire like great engineers or like geniuses, and then you trying to figure out how to put it in the market.
Got you. That's a tricky one. You know, I would say one thing that I find fascinating about Facebook, outside of all of the bad stuff that we hear about, is how they deploy features, right? Each feature is deployed to a very small micro audience, and if it works, they consider opening it up to a larger audience, right? And I think there's a lot that, say, incumbents, like traditional big businesses, I'll pick on one, Bell Labs in the United States, which was struggling for a long time, and known significantly for their R&D capacity. Same with Xerox in California, which quite frankly instigated a lot of what we're talking about tonight, but didn't benefit from it. And I guess, you know, what I would say there is, like, that is typically seen in this kind of monolithic, like, we need to R&D the hell out of the thing, and then do all this analysis before we put it out to market, because once it's out to market, it's out to everybody. But instead, you could look at, and this is also interesting if you think about how Uber or Lyft or Foursquare rolled out. They rolled out, and this is actually really, this is a lesson that I learned. It was really odd to me, but they rolled out city to city. They didn't just kind of turn on to the internet, both in the United States and everywhere. They rolled out city by city, and that was a patient way of doing things. It was kind of like an old school brick and mortar kind of way of doing things, but it worked for them. All of that is to say is, I think there are new mechanisms, new methods that one can use to roll out and test if an idea is worth pursuing. And learning from the Ubers and the Facebooks and the Foursquares is actually kind of interesting. And at the end of the day, that's effectively what I was doing with Lost Arts, is before I go and raise a ton of capital for this big idea that I had, I wanted to make sure that it was worth raising money for, right? I also wanted to make sure it was going to be fun, because starting a company is excessively brutal, and if it's not fun, that sounds exceptionally miserable. So that first space was an R&D lab for me as much as it was for the participants. Does that answer your question? So we can talk later at the bar. Cool.
Okay, well, that's it. So thank you all once again for coming and sticking that to the end. It's been great to do this for all of you. Just a reminder that next event the Binary District and Strelka are doing is on August 9th. It will be right here. It's called How Technologies Are Changing the Public Sector. And the star speaker will be Steph Stevens-Davidowitz, who's a former Google data scientist. He wrote a book last year, Everybody Lies. It was a New York Times bestseller and won a few other yearly best-of lists in the US press, and that should be very exciting. So August 9th, How Technology is Changing the Public Sector. And once again, thank you all very much. Good night.
Thank you, guys. Thanks for coming out.